Welcome to new people to the committee, and there's some old faces who are familiar. And I'll introduce myself. I'm Stephen Watson. I'm the co-opted independent chair, the new elected chair of the Audit Committee. As mentioned on point 1 of your agenda pack, the committee is asked to note the membership in terms of reference of the appointed by the council, and the election of Stephen Watson, myself, as the chair of the committee, as appointed by council on the 7th of July 2021. There's a helpful independent chair guide on there. It's basically got the independent members, Mr. Topping, who is one independent member as well, and one vacancy, which we're looking to fill at the minute for another independent member. The statement of purpose of the committee is in there. The role of internal audit, external audit's role, the financial reporting side of things, the accountability arrangements is all in there. It might look like a bit of a throwaway at the start of the agenda pack, but I think this is quite an important summary for this committee going forward, because I will be, as a chair, referring to this going forward in future meetings as kind of the terms of our meeting, if you like, the terms of what we're here to do and what we're here to achieve. So it's in there right at the start of the paper pack. It's worth mentioning as well that the Audit Committee is also designated as the Group Audit Committee for the intended entities within Northumberland County Council's accounting group boundary, and the detailed terms of reference for this function are contained within Part 3 of the Council's Constitution. So that's very important to remember as well, that we are now not just the Audit Committee, but we are the Group Audit Committee for the Council as well. So, moving on from that, are there any apologies? Sorry, the point.
Sorry if I could, Chair. It was just to say that in terms of the Labour Group representation, the nominations were made prior to Advance Northumberland's directorship nominations, and therefore it's not appropriate for Councillor Grimshaw to be on this committee, so she won't be on it, and we will be replacing her.
Fine. Thank you for that point, Councillor. Okay, any further points on that preliminary? No? Okay, thank you. Point 2 on the agenda, apologies for absence. Do we have any?
I haven't got any, Chair.
No.
Councillor Scott, Chair.
Sorry?
Councillor Scott.
Councillor Scott.
David Downs messaged me to say that he couldn't attend today because of the work commitments.
Okay, and that's Deputy Chair, Councillor Towns. Okay. Okay. Moving on, point 3, the minutes of the last meeting. Now, I don't intend to go page by page on this, ladies and gentlemen, because obviously there are quite a lot of things there, but you've obviously all had the paper pack for a while. I'll just ask for anybody who sees anything in there that they don't think looks accurate to flag it up now.
It's not really a point of accuracy, and it may be that it's covered later when Cameron updates it, but there's sort of 2 points. I think on page 8 it refers to the annual governance statement, and which was not reviewed, because I wasn't on the committee then, but which was reviewed at the April meeting. I do wonder whether that should be circulated to all new members of the Audit Committee to report the council document. And then the other point on page 9, the penultimate paragraph was around VFM, and I'm happy to defer that. But is that something that Cameron's going to cover in his report?
I understand that Mazars might be touching on that later on, so that's probably worth just holding that point back until that point. Yeah, okay. But certainly your point earlier on is probably well made to make sure all new members get a copy of that governance statement, so we're all on the same page with that. So yeah, thank you. Yeah. So, yes, Jill.
Just to say that the statement, the annual governance statement, is included within the final accounts that are in front of the committee for approval today. So you all have them.
Okay, so that answers the question, and we all have a copy, and it's up to date. That's great. Thank you for that, John. Okay, so can we take the minutes in that case then as a true and accurate reflection of the last meeting for those of us who were there?
Oh, well, I was there, Chair, so yeah. I'm happy to, yes.
Right, okay. Well, I was there as well, and I think they're good. So, can we take that as okay, and we move on from that? Okay. Disclosure of members' interest is our next topic, which is a standing item. Unless already entered in the Council's register of members' interests, members are required to disclose any personal interest, which includes any disclosable pecuniary interest they may have in any of the items included on the agenda for this meeting, in accordance with the Code of Conduct adopted by the Council on the 4th of July 2012, and are reminded that if they have any personal interest of a prejudicial nature, as defined under paragraph 17 of the Code of Conduct, they must not participate in any discussion or vote on the matter and must leave the room. NB. Any member needing clarification must contact legal services by email at monitoringofficer@northumberland.gov.uk. Please refer to the guidance on disclosure at the rear of the agenda letter. So quite a formal but important point, I think, especially with new members who may have different interests which might not actually be compatible with some of the discussions we have later on. Okay. Yes, Councillor.
Chair, if I could just confirm, because the Democratic Services have circulated to group leaders about some outstanding declarations of interests relating to councillors, just to confirm that nobody on this committee is outstanding in terms of declaring anything.
Thank you, Councillor. That's a point well made. Thank you. No. Okay, we'll tell you that. That's a confirmation that nobody knows of any issue. Thank you. Okay, we now move on to point 5, which is the reports of the external auditor, which I understand it would normally be Cameron Waddell who would be presenting this, but unfortunately Cameron's had, I think, a domestic issue which has prevented him from coming, and it's going to be one of his colleagues, Karen Murray, I think, who's going to be presenting this remotely. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Well, if we've got Karen online now. Let's see if we
have. Thank you, Chair. Can I just confirm that members can hear me speaking?
Yes, I can hear you. Is that loud enough for everybody? Okay, thank you, Karen. And thank you, Karen, for standing in a short notice for this. I realise this is quite a big ask for such a large report, but
it is, and a complicated audit. So I hope that members will bear with me. I've got my colleague Joanne Greener also on the call, and Joanne will help if there are any questions that I can't answer. In the event that we can't give you a complete response to any questions that you might ask today, I will take them away and I will endeavour to respond to you as quickly as I can, but it will be next week before we're able to do that, because it will not be until Jim Defter, our senior manager, is back at work from his annual leave. Cameron is unfortunately not able to be here today because he's had a family emergency and he does need to be elsewhere. Okay. Just in terms of the 4 papers that you have in front of you from us, if I set them out in terms of what they do, and then we'll take them in a sort of order, if that's okay. So you have 2 reports that relate to Northumberland County Council and 2 papers that relate to the pension fund. I'm going to take the council reports first and the pension fund reports second. The pension reports are infinitely less complex and difficult to talk through, really, than the others. In terms of the council's reports, first report is a report that was drafted in March for your consideration, which provides you with an update of where we were with the audit at that time. And then the second report, which is item 5.2 on your papers, follows on from the first report and confirms where we are as of today. Now, it's probably best if I start with 5.2 and then pick up some points from 5.1, if that's okay, because it's better to have the right sort of latest position and conclusion. So these reports are our audit completion reports. They are required by professional standards. So we bring them to you in order to comply with international standards for auditing number 260, ISA 260, you may have heard it referred to, because we are required to communicate our findings to those charged with governance. The reports at the moment cover just the accounts, and we'll touch on the VFM separately later. The reports follow, if you like, the audit strategy memorandum or the audit plan that Cameron would have brought to you at a previous meeting. And in that report, he will have set out the risk that we'd identified in respect of the council's accounts and what we intended to do about those risks. So what is the risk and what is the work we intend to perform? And these 2 reports together conclude on what we have found, what we've done and what we've found. In overall terms, the council's accounts were actually a good quality set of accounts, and were supported by good working papers, which is not to say that there weren't a number of audit issues arising, because there were, but fundamentally the accounts were good. And I would Cameron's thanks to the team at the council for their support during the course of the audit. I think it's important that we reflect on the fact that our audit work was being undertaken as a first year audit during a pandemic situation where everyone was working from home, and of course your officers had a number of things that they needed to be doing in response to immediate COVID pressures in terms of frontline services, which will have been a significant workload impact. So we are very grateful to your team for the support that we've had in completing our work. When Cameron brought the audit strategy memorandum to you, he will have told you that materiality had been set for the council at about £14.1 million, and for the group, he will have told you what he set materiality at. We have amended that slightly during the course of the audit, reflecting a slight change in the council's expenditure position for the year. So materiality that we are working to now for the council is 14.1 million, and it's 14.5 million for the group. That's based on the benchmark that Cameron set out, and you will no doubt have debated at the time, of 1.8% of your gross operating expenditure. The fact that materiality has changed is not anything significant. It is simply a factor of arithmetic, if you like. Once the council's spend changed, then so too does materiality, because it's based on a percentage benchmark. The reports go through then the significant risks that we've identified, and looking, I suppose, at it from the perspective of report 5.2, I can conclude the work on all of those significant risks for you. So we identified the management override of controls as a significant risk, and I'm pretty sure Cameron will have pointed out at the time that the reason that is a risk is because it's a presumed risk by professional standards, and there was nothing particularly in Northumberland that we were overly concerned about at the time that we did our audit planning. I'm pleased to tell you that our work is complete, and there are no issues in respect of risks around management override of controls that you, as the committee charged with governance of the council, need to be made aware of. The second risk that was identified was around revenue recognition, and as you'll see from item 5.2, the work that we needed to complete to get our assurance around that is now complete, and there is nothing that we need to bring to your attention. That is also the case in respect of the third risk we identified, which was around the valuation of the council's defined benefit pension liability. In terms of the valuation of property, plant and equipment, which was the other significant risk that the next significant risk we'd identified, there are two issues that I need to draw to the attention of members. The first is a national issue. So to be absolutely clear, it applies to most local authorities, certainly more than it didn't apply to in respect of the 1920 financial year. And that is that RICS, the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, gave guidance to all valuers during the year that COVID had created what they call a material valuation uncertainty in the position at the 31st of March 2020. That is to say, because we had gone into a national lockdown, transactions around property had effectively stopped, I suppose, for want of a better term, and it was unclear about the extent of the lockdown and the extent of the impacts on the economy. It makes it a little harder to estimate the value of your property, plant and equipment. That's not to say that we don't believe the valuation to be right, it's just to recognise that additional uncertainty. You have correctly included a disclosure in your accounts to refer to the value as material valuation uncertainty, and we will include what is known as an emphasis of matter paragraph in our audit report to draw to the attention of any reader of the accounts the fact that that disclosure has been made by you. That is absolutely normal practice, and as I said, it applied to more sets of accounts for the 1st of March 20 than it didn't in this sector. The second issues in respect of your property, plant and equipment valuations are really about the audit work that we've done. So the first one kind of is done to you, it applies to you. The rest of the points that arise come from the work that we've done. And you will see set out in the bullet points in the property, plant and equipment note in the report, a series of bullets that have identified some of the issues that we had in testing your valuations and gaining assurance around them. You will see that we have required some amendments to the accounts. Those amendments arise for a combination of things. Some of it is down to accounting, some of it is around clarifying ownership, Some of it is revaluation adjustments, and some of it is because there were challenges around the data that your valuer was using in order to calculate the valuations for you, and there were some challenges in the way in which the HRA classification of assets have been done.
Karen, we'll just stop at that point. Just to mention that if anybody has a point in the room here, because obviously this is a very strange sort of mixture of a Zoom meeting and can you raise your hand and draw my attention, and all the questions come through me. That's the point you just made there about the valuation things. That seems to be quite a complex issue, and it seems to have taken quite a lot of time for this year's accounts. You mentioned that the valuation figures might be different slightly because of the situation we've been through over the last 12 months, 18 months, whatever. Are we working on best estimate figures in some respect, and will they actually get put right at some point, or what's the situation with this going forward?
So the best way to describe this, I think, is probably with reference to an example that we can perhaps all understand. So if you are selling your property, your own home, and you get an estate agent in, they'll give you an idea of valuation for your house, you'll put it up for sale. You might get 3 estate agents in, you might get 3 slightly different values. When you put your house up for sale, you'll actually sell it for a 4th figure, usually, which is what the market wants to pay for your property at that time. So the same thing applies to the council's asset base. Your valuer comes along at the end of the year or during the course of the year, looks at your assets and calculates what they think that the valuation of those assets should be. In the normal course of events, so if we park COVID and we imagine we weren't in that situation, we will then challenge that valuation. We'll look at the assumptions that the valuer has made and so on, and we will ask ourselves, would we arrive at the same sort of number and something that is, materially correct? It's also fair to say that your officers do that process as well. So they do review the information that comes in from the valuer, and they ask themselves, are the assumptions that the valuer has used here reasonable? Is it what they would expect based on their professional experience of dealing with valuations? You then put those numbers into your accounts, and that's absolutely right and proper. What happened in March 2020, of course, is that it became impossible to understand just for a short time what the market would do in any circumstance. So it's very difficult to understand what the implications might be of the economy and impact and lockdown on your valuations. So you have reflected what the valuer thinks they're worth, and the valuer has taken a view, if you like, that all of the things are equal. But it is the case that the valuer does need to reflect the fact that there is a concern that those values could be affected by the impacts of the pandemic. So it's a very standard position to be in, and it's something that will correct itself this year. So when we look at your accounts for the 31st of March 21, the valuer won't be imposing a material valuation uncertainty, because they will be comfortable that the economy or property sales or whatever are moving along now, and we can start to see how things are actually going and picking up. There are, though, a number of adjustments to your accounts that have been made as a result of the other issues that we've picked up during the course of the audit. And where those things have been amended, then they are taken into account, and they'll be cumulatively taken into account. Where they haven't been amended, naturally, there's only 1 or 2 of those. My expectation is that will be picked up through the 2021 set of accounts. But I would need to go away and look at that again and come back to you, because I'm not close enough to the details to be able to answer that question.
Okay, thank you. That's been very comprehensive. I suppose that from my point of view, there's probably an issue of timeliness attached to this, in the sense that if we have got this very, very wrong in terms of these figures, will we have to wait another year virtually to find out that it's actually it is very wrong, or will we find out before then? And I'll have a question. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, I think I've possibly answered the question badly then, because I didn't address that point. So we are satisfied that the numbers that are in your accounts now are materially correct. That is to say, we don't believe they are very badly wrong. So I referred earlier to materiality of around 14 million. If there are errors, they are less than that, and we would therefore be happy with it. But during the course of our testing, we haven't identified anything that leads us to believe that there is an error the information you've put in your accounts matches that which the valuer has given you, subject to the adjustments that we've agreed during the course of the audit.
Okay, thank you. And I had a question from the floor here. Councillor, you had your hand up?
Oh, sorry, yes. It was just in relation to the valuation and the assumptions made of the down value of Newcastle Airport. And my query was whether a kind of a partnership approach had taken place on that, because obviously we're not the single shareholder of the airport, and a number of the other councils appear not to have taken the same view as is written here. So I just wondered how confident we were with what was being indicated in this report.
Okay, so I am confident that what is reflected in the accounts is how we understand the position to be following the work that we've done. But I am going to take away your question about whether or not others have done the same thing, and if so, whether there's a consistency, because I'm not close enough to the audits in the northeast of England to be able to answer that question. So apologies for not being able to answer it directly. I'll take that away and we'll write back to you.
No, that's fine, Sharon. I appreciate that you can't answer all these questions because you're not close enough to the work, but that's very helpful if you can take that away. Okay, thank you for that. Right, I interrupted you. I think you were moving on to enhanced risk evaluation, long-term investments.
I was, yes.
Yeah. Thank
you. Yeah, so the other risks that we'd identified in your accounts were around accounting for your debtors. And again, I think probably fair to say that that's been something that's been quite challenging across the board in respect of 1920 accounts as well. And we haven't got anything that we need to bring to your attention. We're very satisfied with what you've disclosed in the accounts there. And then the last point was really in respect of the valuation of your investment in Newcastle Airport and the shareholding that you've got, which I will take away if that's okay. There are some other significant issues that we've discussed with your officers during the course of the audit, and there's a fair range of them which are set out in the papers. I wasn't going to touch on them in much detail really, other than to say they are largely connected to COVID and the impact that the lockdown had on the accounts and the numbers that you need to disclose. Across the two reports, so that's the paper at 5.1 and at 5.2, there are a number of internal control issues that we have raised. Those are things where we believe the council needs to take action in order to improve the quality and reliability of the accounts and the systems and processes that underpin them. They are either low priority recommendations or medium priority recommendations, and it's important to keep that in context, because whilst there are a number of them, they are generally not high priority from our perspective as the external auditor. Across the report in 5.1, you will see that those control recommendations relate to the way in which the council operates its journal controls, reconciliations between your accounts payable system and your ledger, the valuations because of some of the issues that I've referred to already in respect of errors that we identified there, and then a series of recommendations that relate really to IT controls. So for example, relating to access to the systems by leavers, system administration rights, and your IT policies, which need to be refreshed and brought up to date and expanded in a couple of places. There is an issue raised in respect of the reconciliation of your loans and investments to underlying records, and a recommendation in respect of how you're accounting for proceeds of a disposal. Of themselves, not particularly significant, and as I say, either level 2 or level 3 recommendations. In the second report, the completion report that is at 5.2, there are a further 2 low priority recommendations and 4 that are medium priority. They relate to exit packages, property, plant and equipment valuation, again, and just to say that the 2 that are assessed as level 3 are both in relation to how you've approached your HRA valuation. So they're sort of the lower end of the significant scale. Both reports together then go on to talk through 2 sets of adjustments. There are those that have been made to the accounts and those that have not been made to the accounts. So you will see some unadjusted misstatements and then you will see the adjusted misstatements laid out for you. There is a further adjusted misstatement that has been made to your accounts that isn't reflected in this report, but it relates to the consolidation of the group, and we will write to you and just confirm that adjustment has been made formally after this meeting. I just need to pick up with the team quite what the background is for that. I wasn't proposing to talk through the errors that we've picked up and the adjustments that have been made in any detail. I think it's probably fair to say that it's not uncommon for there to be adjustments to the accounts, and you know, I often come to meetings like this with reports that have got errors in that we need to formally report to you.
Okay, Karen, I don't want you to talk through all the granular detail necessarily, unless anybody has a point that they want to pick up on that, because it would be quite a long time. Just a quick one. When you found some fairly low-level problems, are these what you might call even bread and butter sort of issues of control? Almost the kind of the basic things which should really be ordinary, everyday control issues in a well-run organisation, because they don't seem to be major things in here, but they do seem to be the basics. There do seem to be a lot of the stuff which is the basics. Would that be a fair comment?
I would agree that there is nothing that is a massive cause of concern. If there were, it would be a level 1 recommendation, and we will be asking for you to take urgent action, immediate action if you like. These are recommendations, are things that you can put right over the course of the year, and would hopefully be reflected in the 2021 arrangements. I think the other thing is that management have responded on each of the recommendations, and we're satisfied that the action management proposed to take will address the concern that we have raised.
Okay, well, just to finish the point, I'm just interested in whether the same issues come up year after year, and whether we're seeing the same control issues producing a comment every single year, and we don't get any further forward in actually improving the control. Do you have any kind of read back across other reports that have been done to actually show that, if that's the case?
So we have followed up the recommendations that were made by our predecessor, because this is our first year, 1920 is our first year of involvement with the council. So we have followed up the recommendations that were made by our predecessor. So it's difficult for me to say whether they come up year after year. It might be some of these things might be just be a function of a change of auditor, so we've asked for something different or we've looked at something different, but it's identified a different underlying issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Right, okay, that's fine if you want to move on to your next part now. I think unless we have any questions, Councillor, you have a question.
Sorry, Chair, just one quick one. It was around council tax and the kind of the floor space that relates to council tax and how that's measured. So the report goes on in terms of council tax and what's the word I'm looking for? How that's calculated. And I just wondered, from a layman councillor's point of view, how is it floor space? Does the council go out? Do we take developers' words for it? Do we do any kind of, I mean, a lot of it is based on plans that are submitted to the council, but how is it justified in terms of the way it's written in the report?
I'm not sure I'm going to be able to answer that question very easily, Councillor, so please come back to me with if what I'm about to say doesn't address the question that you've asked. So when it comes to calculating council tax, that's based on the rateable value of a property, which is assessed by the DV, so district value, sorry. So properties are put into council tax bands and charged a council tax appropriately. Those bands are not a responsibility for council, if you like. That's done elsewhere and is completely independent. So there's no direct connection from the council's perspective between what the valuer says and what the council tax band is, and therefore the council tax band chargeable on a property. I think you are talking specifically there about council dwellings and HRA properties where you'd have council tax payable. When we look at the valuation of other space where there is business rates payable, then again the valuation, the rateable value is assessed by the district valuer, and the council charges business rates based on that. It isn't something that the council calculates itself. as such, and there is therefore again no correlation between the valuation of the property in your books and that bill that is generated as a consequence.
Thanks, Chair. That gives clarity to that context.
Thank you, Karen. I think we have a follow-up question, Councillor.
Yeah, thanks for that. I know that you've had quite a number of issues in terms of the valuations, and one thing that occurs to me, because I'm new to this committee completely, is that we're considering accounts that from about a year and a half ago. That they're very, very late, and obviously the world was a different place a year and a half ago, and that's probably what's given you some of the problems with the valuations. But can I ask that general question? Why are these accounts being presented so late in the day? Because it's a real concern. I would have thought that this would have been dealt with probably 6 to 9 months ago.
Yeah, okay, so where to start with this one? Okay, so in normal circumstances in any other year, the council will be required to have its accounts ready by the May following the year end. So in normal circumstances for the 31st of March 2020, you would expect to have a set of accounts available for audit by the end of May, and you would expect that audit to be completed by the end of July. That is the way that the Accounts and Audit Regulations timetable was initially set up. In 2020, because of the impacts of COVID, MHCLG, who determined that timetable, changed it immediately as we went into lockdown to recognise the fact that local authorities would have essential activities that they needed to undertake in response to the situation that we found ourselves in, and therefore to give some leeway, if you like, in that timetable. So for 2020, you did not need to have your accounts ready until the end of August, and the expectation was that auditors will complete their work by the end of November. In the event, your accounts were ready earlier than that, but because your audit was moving from the predecessor auditor to us, we were never in a position where we would have been able to complete that work necessarily as quickly as the end of July. And actually you were kind of at the back end of the timetable, so we were always planning to deliver your audit a little later than that formal timetable, if you like. In fact, we did make a start on the audit, but some issues emerged that I'm not close to and can't comment on in any detail, that meant that we needed to pause our work, which we did for a period in the autumn, and we returned to pick up the audit in the new year, so at the start of 2021. As I say, I'm probably not best placed to answer the questions there, and it may well be that officers want to contribute to that question to give you a satisfactory response.
Okay, thank you, Karen. I think you probably explained it as far as you understand it, and I appreciate that you're coming in from the outside on this particular piece of work.
Yeah, can I just follow up on that, because it's a bit unusual in my view. I'm used to the commercial world really, and large business audits, and it's pretty unusual to pause them. I think we need an explanation, probably from the Chief Auditor, Cameron Waddell, as to why that pause occurred. Because honestly, looking back a year and a half ago, from the accounts from a year and a half ago, is not very satisfactory at all.
Okay, well, it is a very unusual situation, as obviously I think we are probably right as a committee to actually explore what is the reason behind this, because it has been an excessive delay. Councillor, you have a question?
Yeah, just in relation to Councillor Jackson's point, I suppose, Chair, it might be helpful if Cameron simply circulated what he did to the previous audit committee who asked the same question about the delay, because he explained it around the proportionality of councils that were delayed by significant amounts of time, some between 6 to 9 months, and he addressed the point of pausing previously.
I think that's a fair point, and I think if everybody's happy with that, I'm happy to table it. Cameron, when he gets back to work, and hopefully his situation is improved very shortly, can give us some feedback for the next meeting, maybe what the background story was attached to this. Is that okay for everybody? Okay, thank you. Great, so we'll move on. Karen, thank you for that. And,
okay, thank you. The other thing just to say, just to conclude really on both of these two reports, as far as the accounts go, is that during the course of the audit, a number of changes were made to the accounts to improve the disclosures included in the accounts. So that is to say to make them either stronger in terms of their compliance with the code of accounting practice that you are required to follow, or just to make the disclosures that you have made clearer or more direct, if you like. They're across a range of areas, and really, from my perspective, I would say that all of them whilst a number of them are rather technical, they are all about the quality of your accounts, if you like, in terms of strengthening the compliance with the code. It's not uncommon, again, to make changes in respect to that, because the code is a very long and complex document, as the council's accounts then are of themselves. So that's all I was going to say really about the accounts. But again, happy to take any further questions if there are any. If not, I'll move on to talk about the FM very briefly.
Okay, I'll open it up. Any final questions for Karen on the accounts? Yes, one, Councillor.
Thank you. I just want page 42, where it refers to value for money and the value for money conclusion. There's literally no information there at all, and I think part of the reason that we've had the delay that Councillor Jackson raised was a sort of deeper dive into some of the issues around VFM, and I say that formally as the portfolio holder, and I'm concerned that we're not getting. I mean, how are we able to sign off a set of accounts where there are outstanding VFM issues that have not yet been resolved? So surely we should be deferring signing off the accounts until those issues are thoroughly flushed out and dealt with. And B, we did have a little bit of an update at the last meeting from Cameron. And I think, Councillor Dickinson mentioned some of the technical issues, but there was also a bit of an update about the ongoing VFM work. But we've had no update for this meeting, so we're being asked to sign off a set of accounts, which we know, in previous years, some of these issues have led to qualifications, but these accounts are unqualified, yet there are still some of those issues outstanding. So how do we address that?
Okay, so my understanding is that Cameron is still working through some of the issues in respect to value for money, and is discussing with officers and seeking evidence in respect to some of the issues. I understand, but I will come back and confirm that Cameron expects to be able to issue an opinion on the financial statements, that is to say the financial statements are of themselves okay, without concluding on your value for money arrangements, because he can do that separately. If he needs to, we'll leave that part of the audit open. That's not an uncommon situation. It does happen from time to time in different places where auditors are unable to form a conclusion because they are awaiting the resolution of issues. I'm genuinely not best placed to feed back on this, as you'll appreciate. It is a matter that Cameron will need to talk to you about, but I can get him to provide an update in due course, probably later on next week, if that's helpful.
Okay, Karen, let me just for clarity for myself, actually, more than anything, are you saying that it isn't that unusual for accounts to have a gap in them that can be filled at a later date, but could still be approved by committee, and also B, that Cameron can get us this extra information, which obviously seems to be not quite there, in order for us before the next committee to actually have these accounts signed off?
So I think as members you can approve the accounts as they are before you, and I think we can give an opinion on the financial statements. What we can't do is reach a conclusion on value for money, but we would reflect that in our audit report, and we will complete that work in due course. It is not unheard of for auditors to reach that position and to end up at that place, if you like, at a point in time. If Cameron is able to conclude on value for money before he signs these accounts, then obviously he will do. But my expectation is that we wouldn't be in a position to do that, because we are still waiting for some information. I have to say that I'm basing that on a sort of 3 or 4 minute conversation with Cameron just to get an update ahead of this meeting.
Okay, Councillor, you had a comment?
Yeah, but I do actually think that we're in potentially a difficult situation here. I'm pretty aware, and I haven't got the exact wording of the previous sets of accounts from the previous auditors, but there were some fairly serious value for money issues raised, and this is the third year in a row that those issues are still maintained, and I think there could be a view that some of those issues have actually got worse and not better over the last 2 or 3 years. It's a shame that Cameron, the chief external auditor, can't be here to actually sort of give us more detail on that.
Yeah, I think
it's a very strange. Well, that's a drill. Yeah. When do you think we'll get some more detail on this value for money opinion? Because it is normally attached to the accounts, and it normally goes in with the sort of issues with the annual governance statement, which we've got here as well. But when are we expected
Karen,
to see that?
It's a tough ask for you because it's not your contract, obviously, that you're not your client. But any idea how long this might take?
I'm afraid I don't. I'm sorry. I will provide an update to. I'll try to get an update and I'll report back to you on what the likely timescale is going to be. But I'm not in a position to answer that question. I'm sorry. I appreciate that's not ideal. As I say, Cameron isn't able to be on the call because he's dealing with a family emergency. He would have been here otherwise.
Okay, we understand that. I appreciate that Cameron has got a lot on his plate at the minute, so I think that he has got a genuine issue. Yes, Councillor, you had a second question.
Just
Yeah.
3 very short, sort
Yeah.
of more technical questions. Or maybe actually, but that wasn't recorded in the original note 8 to the accounts. Was that sort of just an accidental oversight? I'm just sort of concerned that it's a £60,000 settlement and it wasn't there originally.
Yes, so nothing that we've found during the course of our audit would lead us to believe that these were deliberate errors. They are just genuine, errors in the preparation of the statements. There's nothing that is of concern for us from that perspective.
And then these are probably questions for Jan. 2 simple. One was around the valuation. We talked about the airport. And it mentions a sort of credit deferment, not a deferment, but a credit impact. As I understood it, we were deferring loan repayments to the airport, and there wouldn't actually be a reduction ultimately in the amount of money repaid. So, is it simply just pushing the payments back rather than letting them off interest payments?
Through you, Chair. Yes, absolutely, that's the case. And the banks who'd also provided loan finance to the airport had suspended their banking covenant requirements for a period. So discussions are going on now about whether further support might be needed, not in the form of equity necessarily, but possibly in the form of sort of guarantees to meet the banking covenant requirements going forwards.
Yeah.
But those discussions are still ongoing.
Okay.
But the intention is that any loans that have been made to the airport will be repaid in due course.
Ultimately.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
And then the
thank you.
final question was about the management representation letter and sort of post-year end events. Are you comfortable that there's nothing that's sort of in the, that's occurred post-year that needs to be, that everything that needed to be reported has been reported?
Again, through you, Chair, yes, I'm satisfied that everything that needs to be disclosed in the management letter of representation has been. So I'm happy to put my signature to that.
Okay, thank you. Right. Karen, unless you have anything more, I mean, I think the question we have at the present time is this can be approved by this committee as it stands now. In Cameron's absence, obviously, it won't be signed off, but then Cameron, by the look of it, has a little bit more to add to this, I think, which you've agreed, Karen. So that means that what we'll be approving is just a work in progress, almost not quite a finished article. Is that correct? So if I'm right, my understanding of that. So are we happy enough with what we're looking at now as it stands, but with the big caveat that there are bits missing in this? as a committee.
Yeah, well, just from my own point of view, and I don't know what other committee members feel, and they probably won't agree with me, but I think it's very difficult to sign this off if it's not part of a package, and if it doesn't come with the value for money opinion, I can't agree to that.
Okay.
I'll just abstain, I think.
Well, in that case, then, sorry, Jan, you wanted to say something?
Just to be clear, we're still dealing with the external auditors' reports.
Yeah.
We haven't actually got to the item that deals with the statement of accounts yet, Chair.
Okay.
So I think the committee is just being asked to receive and note
Right.
the
Okay.
Mazars reports at this point in the agenda.
Okay, well, that
And Karen has a further 2 to present.
covers that. I suppose I'm getting ahead of myself in saying that, I mean, there are no serious caveats. It sounds like we have work in progress to do on these, but sorry, Karen. You still have stuff to cover, Karen. There's still more to do. So, do you want to crack on and continue?
Yeah. There is, but this is relatively quick, I think, Chair, because this is the next 2 papers, items 5.3 and 5.4, are the audit completion report for our work on the pension fund. And I'm delighted to say that all of the work that we need to do in respect to the pension fund is complete and is reported to you here. Again, this is about us reporting to you in compliance with international auditing standards. We propose to give an unqualified opinion on the pension fund accounts. When the initial report was drafted, there was quite a lot of work outstanding, and you'll see that traffic lighted in report 5.4. But if you refer then to item 5.3, you will see that all of the work on those areas is now marked as complete, so that's good. Again, there was a slight change in materiality as a function of the accounts, if you like, that sort of arithmetic issue that I referred to before. So materiality reduced to 12.9 million once we received the accounts. The 2 risks in respect to the pension fund that we'd identified were the management override of controls. You'll recall I said that's a standard risk that professional standards require us to consider, and then work in respect to the valuation of your unquoted investments. So those are the investments that the pension fund holds that are generally considered to be harder to value and indeed involve a greater degree of estimation or judgment. The pension fund's accounts were of good quality. There were some issues with the timeliness of working papers, but we appreciate and recognise that it was difficult for the team. It was the accounts were being prepared as we moved into remote working, both for your offices and for us. And of course, there was the impacts of the merger of the pension fund on your team to take into account. Your team were very cooperative during the course of the audit, and there's nothing there that we need to refer to you. You will see that there are a much smaller number of issues arising from the audit. So there's just one internal control recommendation, which actually mirrors one that's in the council's accounts relating to system reconciliation for your accounts payable system. There is an adjusted error, and there is one unadjusted error that management have declined to amend. Neither are material, and there have been a small number of disclosure changes, again, to improve compliance of these accounts with the requirements imposed on you through the code. I wasn't going to say anything more than that, really, because I do think these papers are quite straightforward, but again, I'm happy to take questions from you.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Any questions on those papers? I've got one from Councillor.
I mean, I don't want to prolong pensions because I know it really excites everybody, but I've got one question. It was just about disclosures still being marked as red on the traffic light system. I just wondered if, other than what you've described, there's still an issue somewhere?
No, so at the time that the initial report with the traffic lights in was drafted, there were a number of disclosure issues that we were still working through with your team. Everything we've asked for amendment for has been made now, and the disclosures updated, and the completion letter, which is 5.3, confirms that that's the case. All we had left to do at that point really was just do a final check that the statements were as we expected them to be, which we don't do until you formally approve them anyway. So that follows today's. It's a sort of, I always describe it to committees as the sort of audit administration, really, that you have to approve the accounts before we can finally check the final version.
Okay, is that okay, Councillor? Thank you, Karen. I think one more, Mr. Topping, one from you.
Thank you, Chair. This is not a question about the finances. It's more a question about the responses from the council to recommendations to do with the IT world. So I'm not expecting you to be able to answer this, but I'd like to just flag up that there are a couple of recommendations regarding internal controls, one of which is to do with testing in the live environment, and the other one is about access to live environment. And it seems to me that the responses against both of these level 2 recommendations is, yeah, we'll need to take a look at this. And if I contrast that with the responses on the finance side, which are much tighter, so my view would be that it would be worthwhile someone in the IT world just making sure that the sort of non-functional requirements area is as tight as it needs to be, because what you don't want is to release products without properly testing them, or corrupt your live environments. And it just needs to be a little bit tighter in terms of the responses from the council than is currently the case, would be my view. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Karen, do you have any particular comment on that issue? I think it sounded more like a general kind of comment on the control environment, Peter, if it was anything, possibly something that the internal auditors would be best placed to pick up in their work, I would have thought. But just in case you had anything to say on that one, Karen.
I don't really, Chair. I think it's for officers to respond on that.
Yeah, okay. Well, we'll park that one, I think, for the time being. I think it sounds a little bit more internal audit than external audit, to be quite honest. Okay, Karen, do you have anything more on your pieces there?
That's me done. Thank you, Chair.
Well, no, thank you, because I appreciate that this has just been quite a big ask to ask you to come in at the very last minute and do this. So if there's no more further questions, I think we'll release you from this part here and move on. Thank you. Okay. We're now on to agenda item 6, the reports of the acting chief internal auditor, and we should have, I think, Kevin.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear, Kevin.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chair. First of all, good morning, and apologies that I can't be there in person with you this morning. Unfortunately, I've now tested positive for the dreaded virus, so I'm kind of confined to home and obviously doing it through the virtual means. So apologies for that. I think, Chair, if I just pick up on that last comment from Mr. Topping, I would entirely agree, and indeed sort of testing in terms of the live environment is something that we apply to all of our internal audits of system reviews, and we'll just make sure we pick that up in terms of our work ongoing.
Excellent. Is that okay, Peter? Yeah. Excellent. Thank you, Kevin. Okay. Well, your report.
Yes, my report, Chair. This is the annual opinion which I am required to bring to committee every year following the work of the preceding 12 months. In the papers before committee today, starting on page 106, we just talk about the annual opinion on the adequacy and effectiveness of the framework of governance, risk management and control, starting with what we mean by governance, risk management and control, what my opinion is for the year, which is that it is satisfactory overall. We then talk through the separate elements of governance, risk management and control, and then just document through the report the work that we've undertaken to allow me to form that opinion and the reasons behind that opinion. It has to be an evidence-based opinion. I can't just say, I think it's okay. There has to be a reason behind that. And obviously the rest of the report just explains in some detail the work that's been undertaken to allow me to come to that opinion. The appendices at the back of the report, Chair, which begin on page 118, just spell out exactly the work that we've undertaken during the 2021 year, which leads to the opinion being made. Obviously, that work did differ slightly than that planned for obvious reasons due to the pandemic, which we'll kind of come on to in a bit more detail in a later agenda item, Chair. But I wouldn't propose to say too much more, but more than happy to take any questions, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Any questions from the floor on this report so far? Councillor, yeah, go on.
Yes, Kevin, page 108, where it refers to the further work in relation to Advanced Northumberland and its companies, and around its internal audit itself. Now, I just want a clarification because it's my interpretation that we've taken over that audit function and that therefore no requirement as kind of listed in this report is now required for them to have their own, or do they still have their own and we audit the audit, as it were?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's probably so there was some overlap between. So historically, Advanced Northumberland have obviously had their own separate audit committee in addition to the County Council's audit committee. Obviously, full council agreed in November around the group audit committee status, but there was overlap in terms of Advanced Northumberland continuing to have its own. We would then obviously have to work out what the interaction between the two respective audit committees were. So whereas the Advanced Audit Committee would be answerable to Advance's board, the Northumberland Group Audit Committee would be responsible and to report to full council. So that's the distinction between the two. Obviously, due to circumstances, the Audit Committee of Advanced Northumberland is not fully constituted. And I think obviously what I'm explaining in that paragraph, which I think is paragraph 3.4.1, is obviously although we haven't audited it as such, I am obviously aware of a number of improvements and changes going on around that at the moment, of which I'm sure this is one of those which will be in the process of being sorted out.
If it's any help, Councillor, I've had some discussions with Kevin and with Alison as the Director of Assurance, talking about how we're going to take this forward as the overseeing audit committee to make sure that we gel everything together and get a proper communication line. But I'll cover that a little bit later on. I think it's probably not the place to actually cover it yet, but I'm going to touch on that at a later point, just to sort of just give the committee some sort of briefing as to how we see this actually working out practically in practice. So I'll come to that at a later point.
That's fine, Chair, and thanks for that, because I think it is important that we do understand that if we've taken over that role, how it will interact with the company and how we are expected to act, because obviously it articulates that in 3.41, and we know we've taken over that function, but as you articulate, we have not yet been told how we will interact.
Absolutely.
But you've covered that later.
Yeah, we know have the responsibility, but we don't yet have a sort of a nuts and bolts of how we're going to do it. But what I've got is a set of proposals to how we're going to work this going forward, which I'll cover in the, I think it'll be in the urgent business section of this, because there isn't anywhere else really to put it, but I'll cover it at that point and give you a kind of full rundown of how we're going to do that. Yes, Councillor.
Thank you very much, Chair. Kevin, it's 3.43 on the same page, 108. It's mentioned about confidential reports and documents that have been shared and or leaked. And it mentions some of the things. So you say internal audit is aware of these instances and has been investigated, with recommendations for improvement agreed. I'm not aware of what those improvements are. I mean, I'm not saying they haven't happened, but it would be nice to know what the improvements are to stop future shares, leaks, whatever. It also states that specific incidences have been referred to Northumbria Police. So I wouldn't mind, well, you may not be able to give us names, obviously, I understand that. But I wouldn't mind what it is Northumbria Police are investigating and are they investigating. And it says on the very last line, for the proper treatment and handling of confidential information, which will be important as the organisation moves ahead. Now, I totally agree. It's got to be important that these things, confidential information is exactly what it says, which is confidential. But I need to know how important it is, because I'm not seeing, basically, or hearing, and I may have missed it, what the results of these investigations are. So is it a low-level importance? Is it a high level? And what is the actual scope of the investigation?
Is that one that you can answer, Kevin, or are we asking too much of you to answer that question?
I can certainly answer parts of that, Chair. I may not be able to give too much detail, but I can certainly answer Councillor Sessford's questions, Chair. With respect to improvements, without going into too much detail, I think one of the examples that I can provide, which members should be familiar with, is the fact that when pink paper reports were issued for today's audit committee meeting, they were issued individually in hard copy with watermarks through the reports. So individually marked with the names of the recipient through each individual document if they were received electronically. And I know that I think the hard copy papers have been issued this morning and are intended to be collected back in at the end of the meeting. So that's maybe a fairly simple example of some of the actions that have been agreed within the organisation to try and mitigate against some of the risks of some of the leaks that we'd seen previously. I'm aware that this just applies to Audit Committee meeting this morning, but I think is an example of some of the measures which the authority are trying to take just to mitigate against those risks. In terms of police investigations, as your Chief Internal Auditor for the County Council, I am bound by my jurisdiction is bound by the boundary of Northumberland County Council. So I can only look at those systems and procedures that are in place within the County Council, and that's where that line stops. If we suspect there is any wrongdoing or criminality or breaches or anything like that by, say, a member of the public or outwith of the Council's jurisdiction, that's obviously something which I am not allowed to investigate. It would be the domain of the police. If we believe that there is potential for criminality, we are duty bound, or I am duty bound as your Chief Internal Auditor, to make a referral to Northumberland Police. I'm aware that I've done that on one case where it was a proposal to the police where the police may have a different view, but my view was I need to refer it to the police to ensure my duties were satisfied. That I have done. The police have not come back and said that they are investigating or there is anything underway. That would be a matter for the police to have to answer. I can't answer that at this moment in time. All I can say is that I think the County Council's obligations have been met. And I think with regard to the last line, in terms of kind of putting a degree of importance on that measure, that's probably quite a subjective one. But I think what I just want to do within the opinion is give a nod to the fact that this has happened over recent months. Again, the opinion has to be something which I can evidence, but I think it's just drawn attention to the fact that the leaks have happened, and clearly within any organisation, the confidentiality of information will be important, especially as during the course of our work we do receive confidential information as a matter of course.
Okay.
I hope that answers.
Yeah, Councillor has just a follow-up on that, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks very much, Kevin, for that. A couple of things. You say that it's the jurisdiction of the police after you've mentioned it to them. I mean, do we then follow it up and ask the police how are the investigations going? Are they doing any investigations, or have they decided not to investigate? At least we know what is happening here. And the other thing about the scope of the investigation, what I really meant by that was, well, first of all, you say, is it any criminality? So I wouldn't mind. I mean, if documents are leaked online, is that criminal? So that would help to understand that in the first place. Because if it is, well, then there is clearly something to investigate. But what is the scope? I mean, when people were investigated, then obviously one of them happened on my committee, so I've been interviewed. Who else were interviewed? I mean, not names, but am I to assume that everybody who had anything to do with any pink paper, whether members, officers, or what, were they all interviewed as well, or was it just members present at that meeting?
Kevin, can I just interject there? Is this actually a question for the acting Chief Internal Auditor? Because the investigation was handled outside of internal audit, I understand, by officers of the council separately. So you weren't probably privy to actually how the investigation was done, Kevin, I would have thought. But your role, I would imagine, as the Chief Internal Auditor, would be to make sure that the council's policies in this area are adhered to, and that actually whatever the council's processes are in these circumstances are being adhered to. Would that be a fair comment, do you think?
I think that's correct, Chair. And I think all I would add is that there were several instances which have been investigated separately. In a couple of those cases, I myself was a recipient of some of the documentation which was subsequently leaked or appeared on social media or in the press. So I myself couldn't lead that investigation for obvious reasons. I was interviewed, I was subject to questioning along with a number of officers and members who received that report. In one of the instances, I was not conflicted in any way, and we did a short piece of work around looking at that and speaking with all recipients of that document to try and ascertain within the jurisdiction and the boundaries that we have within the county council systems whether we could identify any reason for that occurring. But the chair is correct in that I can't necessarily answer for all of the instances that were investigated, as I was investigated myself. I was questioned as part of that myself.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. That's my understanding, is that you were a part of the investigation and not actually running things, but with your internal audit hat on, obviously you have got a handle on whether the investigation was run according to the council's own policies and guidelines in this area.
Yes, that's correct, Chair. Yes, and